Myst, Might, Mayhem. By Han Jung-Wioya. Chapter 360. Sword. Part 1. A gasp escaped Chong Ryong's lips. She had been watching the battle from above with a nervous heart. Though she might have broader experience in many aspects, when it came to martial prowess, Mok Jaeyoung had long since surpassed her. The opponent Mok Jaeyoung was facing was a monster who had not only reached the profound realm but also consumed a spiritual beast's core, transcending human limits. As such, it was difficult to predict the outcome of this battle. Thinking that Mok Jaeyoung might lose if things went wrong, she had been preparing to intervene if necessary. If it doesn't work out, I'll step in. Though the opponent was such a monster that she might not be of much help, she couldn't let him die when their karmic connection had been established. But when the hazy mist and thunderclouds obscuring her vision cleared, a surprising result unfolded. Mok Jaeyoung had emerged victorious. What on earth is that? The sword made of pure energy piercing the blade user's chest. Seeing it, she couldn't help but be shocked. It was a level of martial technique that she, who had never let go of her sword in life or even in death, had never imagined or experienced. The true realm of invincible sword, where a sword is no longer needed. She was genuinely impressed. Clicking her tongue in admiration, she soon descended to where Mok Jaeyoung was. However, thump! The form of the blade user who had been kneeling collapsed. There was a gaping hole in the middle of his face that had been thrown backward, and looking at that, it seemed impossible for him to revive, superhuman regeneration or not. As Chong Ryong approached Mok Jaeyoung, she suddenly halted. This was because she saw Mok Jaeyoung smiling at her with an expression she had never seen before. The smile was so radiant that Chong Ryong was momentarily dumbfounded. Was this really an expression that the mortal she knew could make? What on earth? She knew that he usually wore a smiling expression, but since she was aware that there was almost no emotion in that smile, she had always considered it expressionless no matter how much she looked at it. But this smile was completely different. There was an inexplicable joy in his eyes as he looked at her. What's this? As she stared at this, Chong Ryong felt a subtle feeling. It felt as if her non-existent heart was beating. Chong Ryong quickly turned her head away. Making eye contact with him was strangely difficult. It wasn't because it was burdensome or repulsive, but just the act of making eye contact made her feel weird. How should she describe this? Embarrassment? Or shyness? It's good. What? I said it's good. That I didn't die and got to see Chong Ryong again. What nonsense are you suddenly spouting? Chong Ryong found herself stammering at Mok Jaeyoung's unexpected words. It's not like he ate something wrong, but she couldn't understand why he was suddenly making such an expression and saying these things. Feeling at a loss for what to say, Chong Ryong tried to change the subject. You, just now. Before she could finish her sentence, Mok Jaeyoung suddenly walked backward, step. Standing in front of the fallen blade user, //////. He used his magic sword plundering killing sword to split the blade user's neck and limbs. The sight of the blade user split into 6 pieces was utterly gruesome. Chong Ryong asked about this. Are you making sure? Yes. His head is practically gone, but just in case. Mok Jaeyoung said this while shaking the blood off his sword onto the ground. Chong Ryong shook her head at Mok Jaeyoung's judgment. As always, he was someone who never left any loose ends in such matters. Since I've already cut him up, should I chop the body into even smaller pieces? Right here? Are you going to completely pulverize? But then... Rumble. The ground suddenly began to shake. At this sudden phenomenon, Mok Jaeyoung glanced at the shaking ground and then said to Chong Ryong, it might be better to step back for a moment. Indeed, we should. Whoosh. Just as Mok Jaeyoung lightly leapt backward and Chong Ryong flew to the rear, boom. Something huge burst out of the ground with a thunderous noise. It was the monster earth mole dragon. The earth mole dragon that suddenly appeared had burst through the ground exactly where the blade user's body, cut into 6 pieces, was lying. The monster earth mole dragon, which had swallowed the pieces of the blade user's body as it emerged, let out a roar as if satisfied. Gruer. It seemed that the demonic nature had exploded due to the blood spilled on the ground, causing it to surface. After swallowing the blade user, the monster earth mole dragon seemed to sense Mok Jiangyun, glanced in his direction once, and then burrowed back into the ground. Rumble, 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 rumble. As the earth mole dragon disappeared into the ground, Mok Jiangyun shrugged and said, "I guess there's no chance he'll survive now." Indeed. Should we say he was extremely unlucky? Not only had he been turned into pieces of meat, but he had also become food for a monster. As the presence of the monster earth mole dragon completely vanished, Chang Ryong looked around at the devastated surroundings and said, "I have more than 1 or 2 things I want to ask. About that blackening, and about forming a sword with energy. I really don't know about the blackening either." "Really?" "Yes. If I find out, I'll be sure to tell Chang Ryong." At these words from Mok Jiangyun, Chang Ryong's expression became peculiar. This guy seems to have changed somehow. Originally, when he spoke, he was the type to leave no room for interpretation, as if trying not to give any openings. But now he says he'll definitely tell her. Why does he seem to have become so favorable? As she was wondering about this, Mok Jiangyun spoke. "Are you talking about forming a sword with energy like this?" Woong woong woong. As Mok Jiangyun extended his hand, energy condensed above it, taking the form of a sword. Seeing this, Chang Ryong couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. "Amazing. You wielded a sword with energy. To think that making something non-existent exist in form could be possible like this. Indeed. It's as good as non-existent yet has form, so it should be called a formless sword." A formless sword? Invincible sword? Yes. That's what we should call it. But how on earth did you gain this insight? Insight? Yes. Well, it's not something I gained by trying to gain insight. If it's not something you gained by trying to gain insight, then how on earth did you reach such a supreme realm? Was it a sudden enlightenment? I suppose you could say it was similar. When I thought I might die from that person's blade, I just burned with the will to live at the boundary between life and death. The boundary between life and death? Yes. Mok Jiangyun had manifested a strong will at the boundary between life and death. His will was so strong that it even gave form to energy, which normally cannot take shape by itself. This was an insight that transcended becoming one with the sword. It was a shocking awakening even for Chang Ryong, who had believed that the profound realm, the wall of walls, was the supreme realm. Your innate talent and martial prowess have surpassed the realm where I can teach you any further. She had always refrained from excessive praise, believing it would hinder progress, no matter how strong Mok Jiangyun became. However, now that she judged he had reached a supreme realm that could no longer be called novice, she couldn't help but be honest. At her words, Mok Jiangyun shook his head. Not at all. There's still so much I don't know, so Chang Ryong needs to stay by my side and teach me. You're saying things you don't mean. It's not something I don't mean. I want Chang Ryong to keep staying by my side. Chang Ryong was momentarily at a loss for words at Mok Jiangyun's statement. Given the flow of the conversation, it seemed he meant it in a different sense, but that gaze of his looking at her, along with his softened tone, made her conscious of it in a completely different direction. Realizing that if this continued, she might get caught up in the atmosphere, Chang Ryong changed the subject again. Is your body condition alright? My body? Yes. If your body is fine, shouldn't we go up there? Chang Ryong pointed to the top of the cliff. It was so deep that even the light shining from above seemed too far away. At her question, Mok Jiangyun examined his body condition. Due to the aftermath of concentrating all his power into a single point and then stopping, all his muscles had been torn, so he had compensated for this using the evil blood-shifting technique and other muscles to maintain movement. But... Russell. his body moved perfectly fine. It seemed that after gaining the new insight, even the ruptured or torn muscles had all healed. No, rather, the movement of his muscles seemed even smoother than before. Should we say the elasticity had increased? I don't think I need to do any energy circulation or anything like that. More importantly, there was an item he had dropped during the fight that he needed to retrieve. Mok Jaehyun scanned his surroundings. Not far away, his unique weapon, the magic sword Evil Commandment Sword, was lying on the ground. Around it were numerous sword and blade marks. These were traces left from his exchange of sword techniques with the blade user. I might have died if I had been unlucky. That's how strong, no, dangerous an opponent he was. Not just the power of the spiritual beast core, but the blade user's blade techniques were truly a new world. Thanks to the trajectories that completely ignored the body's joint range of motion and muscles, he had quite a hard time adapting when he first encountered them. Of course, from the point he adapted, those trajectories became visible to his eyes, so dealing with them wasn't difficult. However, this kind of perspective certainly seemed helpful. Why are you like that? At Chang Ryang's question, Mok Jaehyun extended his hand, swish. Grab. He retrieved the magic sword Evil Commandment Sword using the void object grasping technique and replied, I was thinking about what it would be like to create a sword technique that surpasses the range of joint motion and the limits of muscles. The range of joint motion and limits of muscles? Don't tell me it's because of fighting that guy? Yes. It certainly was an extraordinary blade technique, but would that be possible? Do you think it's not possible? That was a blade technique only possible for someone with a completely different joint and muscle structure, and even overall body structure, from normal people. No matter how exceptional your memory is and how outstanding your ability to embody what you've learned, this seems like a separate issue. Chang Ryan judged that this would be difficult even for Mok Jaehyun. How could it be possible without long years of training to change muscle structure and joint range of motion? But then Mok Jaehyun grasped the hilt of the magic sword Evil Commandment Sword and took the stance for the demonic sword art's energy-gathering technique. What are you trying to do? I thought I'd give it a try. Try? Yes. I thought I might be able to make the sword-drawing technique of the demonic sword art even more complete. Whoosh! No sooner had he finished speaking than Mok Jaehyun tried to apply the blade technique he remembered the blade user using to the demonic sword art, his own created sword-drawing technique. If this was possible, it might increase the range of motion for trajectories in the empty parts of the sword technique. So Mok Jaehyun unleashed what was in his mind. //////. For Mok Jaehyun now, the sword was a brush. He drew trajectories with his sword as if brushing strokes on a blank canvas. Chang Ryan, who had been watching this with a half-doubting gaze, gradually showed a strange light in her eyes. This was because Mok Jaehyun was truly extending the trajectories beyond the range of motion of his body's joints. It's still okay. This was also because his muscle elasticity had improved. Perhaps because of this, the start was fine. /////. However, as expected, as the sword-drawing technique continued, he felt the pain of muscles tearing. Since he was drawing trajectories that exceeded the range of joint motion and muscle limits, no matter how much he tried to endure, abnormalities were bound to occur. Crack. Crackle. Although his body was strained, Mok Jaehyun endured this and continued to demonstrate the technique. Ordinary people would have already given up midway, unable to endure, but Mok Jaehyun had extreme endurance for pain and could control his muscles to some extent. Therefore, while he couldn't do anything about the range of joint motion, he compensated for the tearing muscles with other muscles and continued the technique. /////. The forms of the demonic sword art with new trajectories added. Watching this, an exclamation finally burst from Chang Ryang's lips. Huh. It was truly amazing. Until now, she had thought there was no sword technique closer to perfection than the demonic sword art this guy had created. Therefore, she had believed it was a sword-drawing technique that needed no further improvement, but as trajectories that surpassed limits were added to it, It evolved into an incredible sword technique where it became difficult to find weaknesses in any direction. Was this possible? Chong Ryong was genuinely dumbfounded. Is there really no limit to this mortal's talent? Just as she couldn't help but admire this, it happened. Tap. Mok Jae-eun, who had been demonstrating the sword technique, suddenly stopped. Chong Ryong asked. No. Why are you stopping? Ah. Then Mok Jae-eun exhaled softly. ///. He carved letters into the cliff face with sharp energy. Impossible. It meant not possible. Since he hadn't added trajectories to all sword drawing techniques yet, Chong Ryong asked in confusion, "What do you mean impossible?" "It seems quite possible. I don't think it's feasible right away." Right away? Yes. Of course, if we force it, it might be possible someday. But if we continue from the point where the joints are already strained, they might completely misalign. Didn't you already take that into account? Yes. But, a thought suddenly occurred to me. What thought? If we took the time to increase the range of joint motion and change the muscles to compensate, we could probably use this freely, but I think that would be a waste of time. Huh? You wrote impossible just because of such a reason? No. It's because I think it would be difficult for anyone but me. What? The demonic sword art is already a sword drawing technique that's difficult for anyone but me to use just because of the number of sword forms. If we add sword forms that exceed the range of joint motion and muscle limits, it would become a sword technique that no one could learn. At these words from Mok Jae-eun, Chong Ryong's mouth closed. Certainly, if this were completed, it would give birth to a sword technique close to perfection. However, as the mortal said, this sword technique was already a sword drawing technique that surpassed limits due to having too many sword forms, and if trajectories surpassing limits were added on top of that, who indeed could learn it? His opinion certainly had a point. For martial arts to continue for generations, there needs to be some degree of versatility. At that moment, Mok Jae-eun shrugged and continued speaking. And even if we don't consider someone else learning it, since I have the invincible sword anyway, there's no need to forcibly train and change muscles and joints to compensate for empty trajectories. Invincible sword. Right. That's true, you have that. Anyway, let's stop adding trajectories here. Well, if that's what you've decided, so be it. But seeing you make such a decision, even though you keep talking about revenge, it seems you're thinking about having disciples. Disciples? Yes. Ahem. For a moment, she was about to say descendants but changed her expression to disciples with a somewhat bitter voice. Even if not descendants, he could still take on disciples. To these words of hers, Mok Jae-eun casually replied. Well, I suppose it wouldn't matter if I just kept it to myself and left, but it seems a waste to do so. Oh ho. So you've come to want disciples? Disciples are one thing, but if what that so-called prophet said is true, I might even have descendants. Descendants? Didn't you say you weren't interested in such things? I'm not interested. Then why suddenly talk about descendants? Did nearly dying suddenly awaken some instinct for species propagation? It wouldn't be bad to have them. It wouldn't be bad to have them? Yes. I think it would be fine even if Chong Ryong possessed someone to give birth to my child. At Mok Jae-eun's unexpected words, Chong Ryong's face and spiritual body froze as if turned to ice. Chapter 361. Sword. Part 2. Yes. I think it would be fine even if Chong Ryong possessed someone to give birth to my child. Dash. Chong Ryong, frozen like ice, was at a loss for what to do. As a vengeful spirit, she had remained in this world to resolve her grudge, but she was merely a spiritual body without even a physical form. Thus, no matter what emotions she might develop, she considered them all meaningless. But now, Mok Jae-eun had shaken her with completely unexpected words. What are you? She was so flustered that she couldn't speak properly. Mok Jae-eun's words were that shocking. Does this mortal truly understand what he just said? Is he perhaps mocking her? As the bewildering emotions passed, anger began to rise. Mortal, do you know what you're saying right now? Why wouldn't I know? What? I said I'd like it if Chong Ryong had my child. Are you trying to play word games with me? It's not a word game. If this isn't a word game, then what are you saying? Telling a dead vengeful spirit to bear a child, this is insulting to me. Grab. Before she could finish speaking, Mok Jaeon grabbed her hand. Unlike other exorcists, he could directly touch her as if she were corporeal, even without high spiritual power. Grip. Seeing Mok Jaeon firmly grasping her hand, she was so flustered she didn't know what to do. What are you doing? What does that matter? What do you mean, what does it matter? What does it matter that you're a dead vengeful spirit? What do you mean, what does it matter? I am dead, and you, mortal, are alive. What does being dead or alive have to do with liking someone? At these words from Mok Jaeon, Chong Ryong was at a loss for words. It was truly bizarre. She was merely a spiritual body, so she had no heart and no blood flowing. Nevertheless, she was caught in the strange phenomenon of her face feeling hot and her chest pounding as if her heart was beating fast, making her unable to look at him. Liking. Is this mortal really playing with her? But Mok Jaeon's gaze as he looked at her was completely different from usual. How could this guy, who was the very embodiment of emotionlessness, be looking at her with such warm eyes? Looking into those eyes made her heart weak. This shouldn't be happening. It felt like the long years she had stubbornly endured with only vengeance would crumble. Then Mok Jaeon said to Chong Ryong, "Do you dislike me, Chong Ryong?" With that one question, Chong Ryong's heart was about to completely crumble. She wasn't a fool. She was constantly aware of the signs she felt from him and her own weakening heart. That's why she had hoped as much as possible that this situation wouldn't occur. But why is this guy trying to make her so weak like this? Chong Ryong's hand, held by Mok Jaeon, was about to tighten. I. At that moment, the image of someone wailing flashed through Chong Ryong's mind. Slap. Chong Ryong hurriedly shook off Mok Jaeon's hand. Then, biting her lip, she spoke in a resolute voice. This one does not. This one exists only for revenge. Isn't it the same for you? Revenge. Hearing the disappointment in Mok Jaeon's voice, she turned her gaze away. She felt that if she made eye contact, her heart might weaken unnecessarily. But then Mok Jaeon continued speaking. That's right. Revenge was everything. Was? It's past tense. What is he trying to say? It feels like I shouldn't listen. But then, I think it would be nice to be with Chong Ryong after the revenge is done. Huh? Chong Ryong's eyes trembled. Why are you, mortal, trying to make her weak when she's trying to resolutely push you away? As she was merely a dead vengeful spirit, she no longer had any desire to be connected with anyone. To her, who was like this, Mok Jaeon approached and said, "But you're right too." What? Is he giving up? Really? The human heart is truly fickle. As she sensed signs of giving up in his words, she felt somewhat regretful. But then Mok Jaeon said, I was only thinking of myself. Not just me, but we need to finish your revenge too. Isn't that right? If both our revenges are finished, then could Chong Ryong like me too? Chong Ryong's eyes, which had been avoiding his gaze, were now directed at Mok Jaeon again. Why? She had thought that, unlike others, she would never be attracted to such an emotionless being even if he were alive. But you, mortal. Right at that moment. Whoosh. Mok Jaeon suddenly stretched his hand upward. Then something flew and landed in his hand. It was none other than a bracelet. What is that? At Chong Ryong's question, Mok Jaeon looked up at the top of the cliff with narrowed eyes and said, It seems to be the accessory Yi Sang-ah always wears on her wrist. Yi Sang-ah, the granddaughter of the Holy Fire Priestess. Why had her bracelet, which she always wore, suddenly fallen down the cliff? As she was wondering this, Chong Ryong said to Mok Jiangun, I don't know what's happening, but we should go up for now. Indeed. But it seems you haven't answered my question yet. At Mok Jiangun's directness, Chong Ryong's lips twitched as if she was about to say something, then clenched her fist and said, I'll consider it if the revenge is finished. Consider? Yes. Can emotions be something to consider? Humph. Don't nitpick every little thing. This one's thoughts haven't changed. Ah. Is that so? Mok Jiangun shrugged and smiled slightly. Consideration ultimately meant leaving room for possibility, so it wasn't impossible. Therefore, this was enough for now. Just half a moment ago, a young man and woman were standing with their backs to the broken cliff. They were O Yianwu, the third son of O Qianmu, the master of the spiritual sword sanctuary, and Yi Sang-a, the granddaughter of the holy fire priestess. These two were surrounded by sword disciples of the spiritual sword sanctuary, and this scene was being observed by guests of the spiritual sword sanctuary and Zhang Myong Sate, an investigator from the Righteous Alliance and a member of the Hangshan sect, along with Moyong Hak, the eldest son of the Moyong family. How did it come to this? It was because O Wungsong, the second son of Master O, had exposed Yi Sang-a as a member of the Fire Faith Order. Hand over that object. It belongs to this young lady. When Junior Master O Wung Huang spoke these words, O Wungsong, who had noticed her identity, immediately started pushing the atmosphere as soon as he regained consciousness. Master and honored guests, do you truly not understand? That mysterious swordsman, and the Fire Faith Order expert that this wench brought, caused this disaster trying to steal that glowing orb that was taken from that brat Yianwu. These words from O Wungsong were enough to sway public opinion. The perception of the Fire Faith Order wasn't very good even among martial artists, so people began to think that the cause of this incident originated from Yi Sang-a and O Yianwu. That's right. It makes sense. If they hadn't come, this situation wouldn't have happened. How many people have died? Damn Fire Faith Order members. Shoo. He's still the Master O's son. Son or not, it's because of them. Yi Sang-a's identity as a Fire Faith Order member and O Wungsong's instigation were driving them into a corner. Of course, not everyone was pushing them. Junior Master O Wung Huang, who had learned his younger brother O Yianwu's true intentions, stepped forward to try to calm the situation. Please calm down, my sword disciples and honored guests. It's too hasty to conclude that this happened because of them. With the Righteous Alliance investigators here, we can make a judgment after a thorough investigation. What do you mean calm down? Second young master O Wungsong is right. If it weren't for your third brother who joined the Fire Faith Order and that wench, none of this would have happened. That's right. If it weren't for them, neither the tragedy of the Namgung family nor this disaster here would have occurred. What on earth are you saying, Junior Master? But it was not enough to soothe the crowd that was already as angry as it could be. They were convinced that all the blame lay with O Yianwu and Yi Sang-a, who were Fire Faith Order members, and believed they should pay the price. Moyong Hak from the Righteous Alliance seemed to share this opinion. Sate. I'll arrest them for now. Those who fell off the cliff died by the Master's hand, so send the Alliance's warriors to retrieve the bodies and escort these two. Ba. Patron Moyong, let's observe for a moment. Observe? This is clearly. Your opinion has merit, patron, but you're being too swayed by instigation. Sate. At Zhang Myong Sate's words, Moyong Hak sighed as if frustrated. As an assigned investigator, he needed to draw some conclusion one way or another. But luckily, that monstrous true culprit who was hard to subdue had essentially mutually destroyed himself with the Fire Faith Order expert, and those perceived to be the root cause were right here. It should be a simple matter of just escorting them, so why observe? At that moment, someone among the guests stepped forward and spoke. What are you trying to do by determining the root cause here and now? It was Goe, who had been staying in this sword valley the longest among the guests. When Goe stepped forward, the guests showed incomprehensible reactions. No, Senior Goe. Senior Gakko has died, how can you say such things now? That's right. It's crystal clear that they brought about this incident, so how can you say not to determine the root cause? If you're not going to let the deaths of our seniors and juniors pass like this, then step aside. Most of the guests in the Sword Valley were close friends. With more than half of them having been brutally sacrificed, their anger was not likely to subside easily. But Goe was also someone with an even fierier temper than them. Silence. When Goe shouted with internal energy in his voice, those who had been clamoring all closed their mouths at once. When it became somewhat quiet, Goe spoke again. We are sword disciples and martial artists. We're angry about the deaths of Gakko and the others, but that was because our martial arts and swordsmanship were inferior to that damned blade user. But why are you ignoring that and saying these young ones should take responsibility as if they're the root cause? It's not a matter of attitude, Senior. They're Fire Faith Order members. That damn Fire Faith Order. Fire Faith Order. Are you going to kill every Fire Faith Order member you see? A martial artist's death ultimately comes from not being strong enough in the law of the jungle. Why can't you see the essence? At Goe's rebuke, some looked ashamed. This was because they were people with strong pride as martial artists. However, there was someone who was instigating to prevent this atmosphere from settling down, Senior Goe. If it weren't for those Fire Faith Order members, that blade user wouldn't have appeared, this horrible tragedy wouldn't have happened, and my arm wouldn't have been cut off. Surely you're not trying to defend them? It was Oh Woong-song, the second son of the master. At his words, the guests and martial artists stirred again. The second young master is right. How can you defend them? Huh. You're truly heartless. Is Senior Gakko's death because he was weak? Are you saying all weak people should die unfairly? What did you say? Goe was dumbfounded at their reactions. If there was a situation where cause and effect should be examined because everything has a causal relationship, it should be examined, but right now, their anger was being instigated by the glib tongue of that master's second son. That guy was making things more complicated by blaming this and that. Please calm down. Junior Master Oh Woong-hwang tried hard to calm them down, but it was useless. Seeing this, the second son Oh Woong-song laughed inwardly. It was truly a blessing in disguise, wasn't it? Only after losing his arm did he come to his senses, and although he was in agony at first, later he saw this as an opportunity. He didn't understand why his older brother suddenly tried to help them, but if he could use this as an excuse to accuse him of trying to help a Fire Faith Order member, what would happen? It seemed possible that he might even be able to have the position of Junior Master stripped away. It all depends on Father's decision. Oh Woong-song looked at Master Oh Kyeonmu, who was standing on the cliff looking down. Master Oh Kyeonmu had been looking down for a long time, not taking his eyes off, perhaps to see what had happened to those two monsters. How deep is that place? How could they survive? Even for peerless experts, not only was the depth of this cliff tremendous, but due to the valley winds, it was almost impossible even to descend with a rope. No matter how strong those guys were, it was safe to say there was almost no chance of survival. At that moment, Master Oh Kyeonmu, who had been looking down the cliff, finally raised his head and turned around. Hugh. As he took his gaze off the cliff and turned around, everyone's attention focused on him. Eventually, Master Oh Kyeonmu approached where Oh Yeonwoo and Yi Song-ah were, with his hands behind his back. Then Oh Yeonwoo prostrated himself on the ground. No, Master. This incident is absolutely not related to us. Or even if it is, it has nothing to do with Mishi here. Yeonwoo. Yi Song-ah was dismayed at his words. Oh Yeonwoo's intention was clear. He was trying to save her, at least. Knowing his affection, Junior Master Oh Woong-hwang also knelt on one knee, clasped his hands, and spoke respectfully. Master. This son will investigate this incident. So for now. Didn't brother say that? That the orb belongs to that young lady, so return it? Brother, What connection do you have with that fire faith order wench that you tried to help her? Before he could finish speaking, Oh Woong-sung interrupted loudly. You? Junior Master Oh Woong-hwang glared at Oh Woong-sung in disbelief. He knew that the second son had always been overly greedy and envious, but he didn't expect him to seize this situation as an opportunity and cling to it like a jackal. But now was not the time to glare at that guy. Master. It's slander. It seems that child is driving these children and me into a corner out of resentment for losing his arm. Enough. At that moment, Master Oh Kyeonma finally spoke. At his words, everyone, including Junior Master Oh Woong-hwang, closed their mouths. The leader here was Master Oh Kyeonmu, and it was safe to say that all decision-making power rested with him. Oh Kyeonma then looked at someone and spoke. Young lady, are you the owner of that shining orb? At this question, her face immediately darkened. Given the situation, she didn't expect complete fairness, but the master's question itself wasn't creating a very favorable situation. That's. Just answer the question. Are you the owner of that orb? It was then. Oh Yinwa suddenly stood up and shouted. Father, that's me, ugh. Oh Yinwa, who was about to say the sacred orb was his, couldn't continue speaking. This was because his mouth was forcibly shut by Master Oh Kyeonmu's profound true energy. At this attitude of his father, even Junior Master Oh Woong-hwang's expression hardened. Because so many people had died, including the Namgung family and the guests of the Sword Valley, it seemed that father was not going to let this incident pass. Ah, Yanwo. Yanwo. Junior Master Oh Woong-hwang bit his lip hard, feeling sorry. Even if he wanted to protect him, if father was determined to hold them responsible, there was no way to prevent it. Then Master Oh Kyeonma spoke again. This will be the last verbal question. Young lady, are you the owner of that orb? Flutter flutter. The atmosphere was not ordinary. Although he hadn't revealed his aura, Yi Sung-oh was trembling, sweating coldly as if she was suffocating from the weighty question. Gripped by fear, she couldn't say anything. It felt like the moment she answered this question, the master would immediately behead her. Master Oh Kyeonma shook his head. Then he approached her even closer and said, If you still don't answer, I'll take that as a positive, flinch. Oh Kyeonma suddenly stopped speaking. Then he immediately turned his head with a hardened expression. Everyone's gaze, which had been focused on Master Oh Kyeonmu, turned in the same direction as him, towards the cliff edge. Everyone's expressions turned to surprise. This was because they saw a being floating up above the cliff edge. It was that monster-like expert who had fallen with the blade user. Chapter 362. Sword. Part 3. A being floating up from the cliff edge. It was none other than Mok Jyeongun. Color returned to the face of Yi Sung-ah, the granddaughter of the holy fire priestess, who had been terrified by the strong pressure of Master Oh Kyeonmu's questioning. The same was true for the third son, Oh Yeonwo, who had inadvertently raised his head from his prostrate position. He had thought Mok Jyeongun had died from the blade user's mutual destruction technique. Yet he had survived from down there. Murmur murmur. The surroundings stirred. The sword disciples and guests of the spiritual sword sanctuary had their eyes wide open in surprise. The scene unfolding before them was undoubtedly FL floating on air. It was the aerial void path, considered the highest realm of body techniques along with walking on air. Those gathered here were all martial artists by nature, so they couldn't help but admire this sight. Even Goe, who was the most senior among the guests, was equally surprised. More than the aerial void path, he was amazed that the one who had been fighting to the death with the blade user as they fell off the cliff had actually survived. This result spoke of only one thing. To think that even such a monster was no match for him. It meant victory. It was truly a complex feeling. As a fellow swordsman, he felt pride that a martial artist wielding a sword had defeated the blade user who acted as if only the way of the blade was the truth, but where on earth did such a person come from? Moreover, because this person had survived, the situation became even more uncontrollable. Xing. Xing. Just looking at how many of the sword disciples were reaching for their sword hilts in amazement was enough to tell. This was the same for the two experts from the Righteous Alliance, Zhang Myong Sate of the Hangshan sect and Moyong Hak. Knowing that this blade user who had returned alive from the cliff was in league with the Fire Faith Order woman, they had no choice but to draw their swords. Sate, what should we do about this? When Moyong Hak asked quietly with a tense face, she replied with a serious expression. Let's be prepared for now, Patron Moyong. Now that he has come back to life, we don't know how the situation will unfold. If one side was overwhelmingly dominant, the situation would inevitably calm down quickly one way or another. But if both sides were evenly matched, it was different. The situation would escalate again. Ba. This is serious. The pinnacle of the current martial world, the six heavens, and an expert approaching that level. It might turn into another bloodbath. If they let their guard down even a little, another tragedy could occur from the aftermath. Zhang Myong Sate believed they needed to prepare thoroughly before that happened. Damn it. In this tense situation, the second son O Wung Song couldn't hide his dismay. He had instigated the situation to his liking, thinking the guy had surely died. But with his return, the situation had completely changed. If that monster-like guy targeted him with malice, the only one who could protect him was his father, Master O Qianmu. At that moment, Mok Jiangun, who had floated up above the cliff, spoke. Did you ask whose sacred orbit was? A clear and confident voice, though it sounded polite. Although it wasn't a loud voice, everyone could hear it. Moreover, strangely enough, upon hearing his voice, they felt their insides churning as if they had sustained internal injuries. His true energy is extraordinary. I thought he would have depleted quite a bit of true energy surviving from down there. He's a monster. They couldn't help but be more tense at the voice still overflowing with true energy. Then O Qianmu looked at Mok Jiangun and answered. That's right. O Qianmu also gradually revealed his energy, infusing his voice with true energy. His voice also resonated throughout the surroundings. As one called the pinnacle of the Central Plains martial world, and one of the more experienced among them, his internal energy was no less profound than that of an inner court expert from Shaolin's Orthodox sect. As expected of Master O. Thanks to the true energy in the Master's voice, my churning internal energy is settling down. He's truly impressive. Even if that guy was a monster comparable to the Six Heavens, his opponent was a true member of the Six Heavens. He was the pinnacle recognized by all martial artists of the Central Plains. With such a master, the audience believed that no matter how strong that guy was, he could be subdued without incident. Then Mok Jiangun continued his answer. What is your intention in asking whose sacred orbit is? It was just a question. But with that one question, the audience fell silent once again. This was because the meaning behind Mok Jiangun's question was crystal clear. Gulp. Everyone's gaze turned to Master O Qianmu. How the situation would unfold depended on his answer. If Master O Qianmu stepped back here, the atmosphere could be eased more, but if that happened, the reputation and face of the spiritual sword sanctuary, which had suffered numerous casualties from an outsider's fight, would be damaged. This was the same for him as one of the Six Heavens. It was then. The patriarch of the Namgung family. The elites of the Namgung family, and the guests here. Their deaths are related to the blade user who was fighting with you. That person's goal was clearly that orb and you people. Yet do you think this master is wrong to ask for accountability? Roar. No sooner had he finished speaking than Master O Qianmu's energy rose fiercely. He had instantly raised his power to the 10-star level. At his words and the impressive aura he was revealing, the sword disciples of the spiritual sword sanctuary and the guests cheered like soldiers with raised morale. Wah! Huh. Should I say this is fortunate? Oh Wung Song, who had been watching tensely, inwardly sighed in relief. If his father had shown a retreating stance here, even he, who had instigated this situation, would have been in a difficult position. Oh Wung Song's gaze then turned to the third son O Yanhua and Yi Song-a. we must capture them. Father wouldn't lose to that guy, but if we capture them, even that monster-like guy would have a weakness and become distracted. But then Mok Jiangan walked through the air towards where Okianmu was and said, "This is quite strange. If you're going to assign blame like that, then if your sons hadn't taken the sacred orb from them, wouldn't none of this have happened?" At that moment, the expressions of the second son O Wongsong and junior master O Wonghuang hardened. Even O Wonghuang, who had tried to help the third son O Yianhua and Yi Song-a, hadn't mentioned the fact that he had subdued them and taken the sacred orb, thinking it was to correct something wrong. But now that Mok Jiangan had revealed this, it seemed like the most fundamental responsibility lay with them. "What do you mean they took the sacred orb? What is this nonsense?" Master O Qianmo looked at junior master O Wonghuang and asked. At this, O Wonghuang became flustered and didn't know what to do. "Master, that's..." His mind became complicated. He had taken the sacred orb thinking that the youngest, O Yianhua, had fallen for the Fire Faith Order, a heretical sect that deceived the masses, so he still didn't think it was greatly wrong. However, when it came to tracing the responsibility for this tragic situation, there was no room for excuse. But then, "Master, when that brat Yianhua brought something like a Fire Faith Order orb to our sect and worshipped it, are you saying we brothers should have just watched? How can this be our responsibility? This is entirely the fault of Yianhua and those people who brought such a dangerous object to our sect." At O Wongsong's urgent cry, some of the stirring guests once again glared at O Yianhua and Yi Song-a with resentful eyes. That's right, in the end, they are the problem. If those Fire Faith Order members who deceive the masses hadn't come to the spiritual sword sanctuary, the sacred place of swordsmanship, this wouldn't have happened in the first place. Seeing this scene, someone clicked their tongue. It was Goe. Blame, blame, blame. How did it come to this? Isn't assigning blame ultimately just venting frustration about something that has already happened? From the beginning, this incident was no different from a man-made disaster that no one could have easily prevented. But seeing these people trying to determine the root cause, instigated by a glib tongue taking advantage of the situation, he felt disillusioned. So finally, Goe said, "So many have been sacrificed, yet you want to keep assigning blame to the very end and make this situation even bigger? I will remove myself from this matter." Whoosh! With those words, he used his lightness skill to distance himself from them. Seeing this, some of the guests shouted at Goe. "How irresponsible! Are you saying we should just let it go when so many fellow swordsmen who discussed the sword have died? We're disappointed, Brother G." Disappointed? Humph. Ignoring their criticism, Goe shouted towards the master. "Master O, if you want to assign blame, this old G will say one thing. It's impossible that someone like you, a peerless expert who has reached the realm of enlightened grandmaster, wouldn't have sensed the danger here. Yet you didn't come immediately because of your obsession with perfecting the sword. If you, the master of this sanctuary, had come just a little earlier, surely there would have been fewer casualties. Can we say this isn't your fault? If you truly want to make a wise choice, don't be swayed by your second son's instigation or saving face. To prevent greater harm, you should stop here." At his cry, which was like a needle piercing the heart, the hall fell silent. Or should we say it became solemn? Although they had been instigated by the second son O Wongsong, they too had been thinking something similar to some extent. If Master O Qianmu, called the pinnacle of the current martial world, had come to the Sword Valley just a little earlier, there might have been fewer casualties. However, no one could blame him for this. No, they couldn't muster the courage to do so. Who would have the guts to assign blame to a peerless expert like him, when they had come here to gain insight into the sword from O Qianmu? As a result, many were at a loss for words out of shame. Of course, not everyone was like this. Moyong Hak, the investigator from the Righteous Alliance, said to Zhang Myong Sate of the Hangshan sect in a frustrated tone, "Why is Senior Goe doing this? When we should be supporting Master O, doing this to undermine morale?" No. Senior Goe's words are correct. What? Ba. Now that the one who became the root cause is dead, assigning blame here will only escalate the situation further. To prevent greater sacrifices, we must stop here. But Sate, they are the Fire Faith Order. Just because the Fire Faith Order is called a heretical sect doesn't mean they can be held responsible for everything. As an assigned investigator, you must not lose impartiality for the sake of clarity. At her rebuke, Moyonghak closed his mouth. Though he still couldn't accept it, Zhang Myong Sate was a wise Buddhist, wiser than anyone. No matter how frustrating it was, he couldn't disrespect her opinion. And ultimately, the decision here rested with Master O Qianmu, the master of this spiritual sword sanctuary. Everyone's gaze, including Moyonghak's, turned to him. How would he judge? If he stops here, surely greater sacrifices can be prevented. However, if he takes a step back, it will damage the reputation and face of the spiritual sword sanctuary, which has suffered numerous internal casualties from outsiders' fight. In the end, no matter what he chose, there would be losses. It was then. Whoosh 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 whoosh. The aura of Master O Qianmu, who had raised his power enough to cause wind pressure all around, subsided. At this, the expressions of everyone watching tensely became gloomy. Is he ultimately taking a step back, risking even his face as one of the six heavens, to prevent greater sacrifices? But right at that moment. Whoosh! Suddenly, Master O Qianmu flew towards the direction of the cliff edge. Along with this, O Qianmu, who had drawn his sword, swung his sword energy towards the cliff wall. Slash 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 slash. The sword energy flowing from the tip of his sword began to carve sword marks into the cliff. But it wasn't just simple sword marks. Letters? Could it be? Slash 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 slash. What was being engraved on the cliff wall was none other than writing. Sword. Way. Sword. Extreme. Slash. Master O Qianmu, who had written the words in one breath without stopping, then kicked off the air and returned to where he was originally. At his divine might, exclamations flowed from the mouths of all those present. Ah! Everyone here was a sword disciple. For them, who handled swords, the divine might that Master O Qianmu had just shown and those words were awe-inspiring in themselves. This was the same even for Goe, who had been about to leave in disappointment at this situation. Goe couldn't help but admire the writing engraved on the cliff. O Qianmu. I thought you were only immersed in sword crafting, but your way of the sword has deepened even further in the meantime. It was incomparable to what was engraved on the broken steel. It was truly befitting of the number one swordsman, infinitely close to the extreme of the sword. Then Master O Qianmu looked at Mok Jiangan and spoke. Many sacrifices have already occurred. Assigning blame here is no longer meaningful. Then what is this now? Although this master is taking a step back to prevent greater sacrifices, before being a craftsman, I too am a martial artist and sword disciple. This sword valley is a place to discuss the sword. If you are also a sword disciple, try to surpass this way of the sword, extreme of the sword to leave this place. Ah! At these words from Master O Qianmu, exclamations flowed here and there. It was truly an excellent move. As the leader of the spiritual sword sanctuary, O Qianmu had swallowed his pride and taken a step back to prevent greater sacrifices. However, by proposing to discuss the sword rather than fighting with force, he had come up with an exquisite strategy to maintain his pride as a martial artist and sword disciple. As expected, O Qianmu was the one respected by all swordsmen of the Central Plains. While competing might be influenced by various factors, when it came to discussing the sword alone, it was no exaggeration to say he was the best under heaven. No matter how strong that guy was, it was impossible for him to surpass Master O Qianmu in swordsmanship. Ba. Indeed, an excellent move, Master O. Zhang Myong Sate of the Hangshan sect also admired his excellent move. With this, Master O had maintained his pride as one of the six heavens and prevented greater sacrifices, a splendid. Interesting. Is this all you propose to discuss about the sword? At that moment, everyone's expressions changed terrifyingly at the words Mok Jiangyun casually uttered. What did this bastard just say? Did he dare say is this all after seeing that sword skill of such a high level? Wasn't he truly arrogant? To feel no enlightenment or awe after seeing the writing on the cliff meant he had no qualification to discuss the sword. Swish! At that moment, Mok Jiangyun walked on air towards the cliff. Then he held his sword intent next to the way of the sword, extreme of the sword, and stretched out his hand forward. Surely he wasn't going to challenge that enlightenment directly? It was a moment of bewilderment. Slash! A sharp energy spread in all directions in an instant. Then, an unbelievable thing happened before everyone's eyes. He didn't swing his sword or make any strokes. Yet. Sword. In the middle of the Sword Valley cliff, wasn't the character for sword engraved in huge writing? The eyes of all the sword disciples watching this shook wildly. How could such a thing be possible? He had written sword in a single stroke. This can't be, no. What is this? This was an incredible feat that even Master Okianmu, who had completed the way of the sword, extreme of the sword, couldn't do. Some sword disciples looked at him in confusion. And then, drip. They saw Master Okianmu, his face wet with cold sweat, unable to take his eyes off the sword, engraved on the cliff.